What would you do if you inherited $50 million, but could only get it by marrying your brother's best friend? The man who disappeared 3 years ago without saying goodbye. The man who just walked back into your life with a secret that could destroy everything? That's exactly what happened to Sienna on her 21st birthday. And what he did next, you won't believe. Stay until the end, because this story has a twist that'll leave you speechless. The lawyer's voice droned through the mahogany-paneled office as Sienna stared at the document that would change everything. Her father's will contained a clause she'd never anticipated. She couldn't access her $50 million inheritance until she turned 21 and married someone he'd chosen. The name on the paper made her stomach drop. Kieran Ashford, her brother's best friend. The man who'd disappeared from her life 3 years ago without explanation. Sienna remembered the summer before he vanished. She was 18, he was 25, and the way he looked at her during those stolen moments made her feel like the only woman in the world. Then one morning he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just emptiness. Now, 2 days before her 21st birthday, here sat that same man across from her, older, harder, with shadows in his dark eyes that hadn't been there before. His jaw was set, his expensive suit perfectly tailored to shoulders broader than she remembered. "Your father made me promise," Kieran said, his voice rough like whiskey and smoke. 3 years ago, before he died, he knew about us, Sienna. He knew I'd fallen for you that summer, and he offered me everything I needed to save my family's company, on one condition. "That you leave me," she whispered, pieces clicking together. "That I leave until you were old enough to choose me yourself." He wanted you to have freedom, education, life experience, not a 25-year-old man stealing your youth. Kieran leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "But he also knew I'd wait. He knew I'd never stop wanting you." Sienna's heart hammered. "And if I refuse this arrangement, then you lose everything your father built. And I lose the only woman I've ever loved." His eyes burned into hers. "So tell me, Sienna, do you still hate me for leaving?" The courthouse was cold and impersonal. Nothing like the fairy tale wedding Sienna had imagined as a girl. She wore a simple cream dress, no veil, no flowers. Kieran stood beside her in charcoal gray, his hand steady as it held hers. When the judge pronounced them married, his kiss was soft, restrained. A promise rather than a claim. But everything changed when they arrived at his penthouse. The door closed behind them, and the careful distance he'd maintained shattered. Kieran backed her against the wall, his breathing heavy, eyes dark with 3 years of want. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice strained. "I've dreamed of this moment every single night since I left. But this has to be real, Sienna. Not just some arrangement for money. I need to know you want this. Want me." Her answer was to pull his mouth to hers. The kiss exploded between them, desperate, hungry, erasing years of absence in seconds. His hands tangled in her hair as hers frantically worked the buttons of his shirt. They barely made it to the bedroom. Clothes fell away like leaves, and when Kieran laid her on his bed, he paused, drinking in the sight of her. "God, you're beautiful. Even more than I remembered." "Stop remembering," she breathed. "Just feel." Their lovemaking was intense and consuming. Kieran worshipped every inch of her skin, learning what made her gasp and arch beneath him. When they finally came together, Sienna felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just physical. This was a claiming, a binding, something ancient and inevitable. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, she traced the new scars on his chest. "What happened while you were gone?" His body tensed. "Things I need to tell you. Truths that might make you leave." He caught her hand, pressed it to his heart. "But not tonight. Tonight you're mine." Morning light filtered through the curtains when Sienna woke to find Kieran's side of the bed cold. She found him in his office, surrounded by files, his expression haunted. The documents spread across his desk bore her father's company logo, and police reports. Kieran, her voice made him jump. What is all this? He looked at her with such anguish that fear coiled in her stomach. Your father didn't just ask me to wait for you, Sienna. He asked me to protect you from the truth about your family. She stepped closer, glimpsing photo after photo. Crime scene images, financial records, her father's signature on documents she didn't understand. I don't understand. Your father wasn't just a businessman. He ran one of the largest money laundering operations on the East Coast. My father, Kieran's voice broke. My father was the detective investigating him. 5 years ago, your father had mine killed to protect his empire. The room spun. Sienna gripped the desk edge. No, my father he was a good man. He couldn't. He loved you desperately. That part was real, Kieran said urgently, reaching for her. She flinched back, and pain flashed across his face. When my mother and sisters were about to lose everything after Dad's death, your father approached me. He said he'd murdered my father in self-defense, that Dad had become obsessed, dangerous. He offered me money to save my family and asked only one thing, that I stay away from you until you were old enough to choose your own path. He knew his world would eventually collapse, and he didn't want you trapped in it. Tears streamed down Sienna's cheeks. So you married me out of guilt? Obligation. I married you because I loved you then and I love you now. Kieran closed the distance between them, framing her face with his hands. Yes, your father's blood money saved my family. Yes, I've spent 3 years investigating his empire, working with the FBI to dismantle it without destroying you in the process. But you, his voice cracked, you were never part of the mission. You were the reason I wanted to live. Sienna locked herself in the guest room for 2 days. Kieran left food outside her door, never knocking, never demanding entry. On the 3rd morning, she emerged to find him asleep on the floor outside her door, laptop open beside him. The screen showed a file labeled Sienna's Clean Break. She read through his tears. He'd spent 3 years building a legal firewall around her, ensuring that when her father's empire fell, she'd be protected. Every transaction, every asset, he'd meticulously separated her from the criminal enterprise. The inheritance was clean money, legitimate businesses her father had kept separate specifically for her future. The guest room door was her test, Sienna realized. He'd given her space to choose to leave or to stay, to hate him or to understand that love could exist in impossibly complicated circumstances. She found him in the gym, shirtless, punishing a heavy bag with a violence that spoke of internal torment. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and his knuckles were bloodied. He didn't notice her until she was directly in front of him, catching the bag mid-swing. My father was a criminal, she said quietly. You sought justice for yours. I can't hate you for that. But, Kieran's chest heaved, hope and dread warring in his expression. But you should have told me before we married. Before we... Heat flooded her cheeks remembering their wedding night. I deserved the full truth. You're right. He didn't make excuses and she loved him more for it. I was selfish. I wanted you so badly that I convinced myself waiting a few more days wouldn't matter. I'm sorry. Sienna stepped closer, pressing her palm to his racing heart. I need time to process who my father really was. But Kieran, I don't need time to know what I feel for you. That's real. That's the one thing I'm certain of. His arms came around her carefully, as if she might shatter. I'll wait as long as you need. I'm not asking you to wait, she whispered against his neck. I'm asking you to help me figure out how we move forward from here. The woman who appeared at their door 3 weeks later was breathtaking, tall, elegant, with knowing eyes that assessed Sienna like a threat. Kieran, she purred. It's been far too long. Kieran's entire body went rigid. Vanessa, what are you doing here? Can't an ex-fiancé check on an old friend? Vanessa swept past them into the penthouse, her designer heels clicking on marble. Oh my, You've redecorated. How very domestic. Ex-fiancé. The word detonated in Sienna's chest. Kieran had never mentioned an engagement. She kept her expression neutral, though anger simmered beneath her skin. Over the next hour, Vanessa painted a picture of a different Kieran. A man who'd promised her the world 3 years ago, then vanished. I thought we were planning a life together, Vanessa said, her hand casually touching Kieran's arm. Then you just disappeared. No explanation. Until I saw your marriage announcement in the society pages. Sienna watched Kieran's jaw clench, noticed how he shifted away from Vanessa's touch. Things changed, he said flatly. Yes, a $50 million inheritance changes many things. Vanessa's smile was sharp as glass. How convenient that you married her right when she gained access to her father's fortune. Get out. Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. You have no idea what you're talking about. But the seed was planted. After Vanessa left, Sienna couldn't meet his eyes. Were you engaged to her? Briefly. 4 years ago, before I met you. She wanted the lifestyle my family name could provide. And I was lonely enough to mistake that for love. When I realized what she really wanted, I ended it. Did you love her? The question tasted like poison. Kieran crossed to her, tilting her chin up until she had to look at him. I thought I did. Then I met you and understood I'd never known what love was. Vanessa was a chapter that ended long before you began. But doubt had taken root, and Sienna hated how easily Vanessa had cultivated it. The FBI raid came at dawn. Agents swarmed the penthouse, and Sienna woke to find Kieran being handcuffed, his face a mask of shock and fury. What the hell is this? Kieran Ashford. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement. The lead agent's voice was cold. Evidence has surfaced showing you've been siphoning money from the Winters estate into offshore accounts. Millions of dollars. That's insane. Sienna scrambled out of bed, grabbing Kieran's arm. He's been helping protect that money. Ma'am, we have his digital fingerprints all over fraudulent transactions dating back 3 years. Bank records, emails, transfers, all pointing to a long-term plan to steal your inheritance. As they led Kieran away, his eyes found hers. Sienna, listen to me. This is a setup. Someone's framing me. Don't believe. The door slammed, cutting off his words. Sienna stood frozen in her nightgown, her world collapsing for the second time in a month. Agents tore through their home, boxing up files, confiscating computers. And in the chaos, Vanessa's words echoed. How convenient that you married her right when she gained access to her father's fortune. At the police station, Sienna demanded answers. The evidence was damning, transaction logs showing Kieran had been systematically draining accounts linked to her inheritance. The prosecutor laid it out like a murder board. Kieran had befriended her father, learned about his criminal empire, and positioned himself to exploit both the legal and illegal assets. He married you to legitimize his access to the money, the prosecutor said almost gently. Classic long con. But it was the email that broke her. A message allegedly from Kieran to an unknown recipient, dated 2 weeks before their wedding. Everything is proceeding as planned. Once we're married, the inheritance is accessible, and I can begin the final transfer. She suspects nothing. Sienna's hands shook holding the printed page. Could everything have been a lie? Sienna didn't sleep. Instead, she did what her father had taught her. She followed the money herself. If Kieran was guilty, she'd find proof. If he was innocent, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame him. She started with the offshore accounts. The transactions appeared in Kieran's name, but the IP addresses were wrong. The transfers occurred from locations he couldn't have been. She had receipts, photos, timestamps proving he'd been with her during many of the alleged transactions. Then she examined the email. The metadata showed it had been created, not sent. Fabricated evidence planted in a system someone had hacked. Took her 4 sleepless days, but she found the thread. Every false transaction originated from a single compromised account, an account belonging to Kieran's former company, the one he'd nearly lost before her father's intervention. Only 3 people had administrative access to that system. Kieran was one. The CFO was another. The third was Vanessa Chun, who'd worked as the company's head of finance before Kieran had ended their engagement. Sienna's blood ran cold as she pieced it together. Vanessa had access, motive, and the technical skills, but she needed help executing something this sophisticated. The CFO had been arrested 2 years ago for embezzlement from a different company. He'd been released 6 months ago. She brought everything to Kieran's lawyer, who rushed it to the FBI. By the time they raided Vanessa's apartment, they found the smoking gun, communications between Vanessa and the ex-CFO planning the entire frame job. They'd intended to destroy Kieran and position Vanessa to help Sienna pick up the pieces and gain access to the fortune herself. When Sienna arrived at the jail to see Kieran, he looked haggard, defeated. Then he saw her face and hope flickered in his eyes. "I know you're innocent," she said, "and I'm so sorry I doubted you, even for a second." Kieran's hand pressed against the glass separating them. "You had every reason to doubt. My past with her, the evidence. But I should have trusted my heart over manufactured proof." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you, Kieran. That's real. Everything else is just noise." They dropped all charges within 24 hours. Vanessa and her accomplice faced decades in prison. When Kieran walked out of jail, Sienna was waiting. She ran to him and he caught her, burying his face in her hair. "Take me home," she whispered. "Our home." The penthouse felt different now, not tainted by lies but cleansed by truth. They'd survived everything. Her father's secrets, Kieran's complicated past, betrayal from enemies disguised as friends. They'd chosen each other repeatedly, even when doubt tried to tear them apart. That night, Kieran ran her a bath, washing away the stress of the last week with gentle hands. He dried her carefully, reverently, and carried her to bed. Their lovemaking was different this time. Slower, deeper, infused with the weight of what they'd overcome. "I want to do this right," Kieran murmured against her skin afterward. He reached into his nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not the one she'd been given for their courthouse wedding, but something new. An emerald surrounded by diamonds, the green the exact shade of her eyes. "We got married for the wrong reasons," he said, sliding it onto her finger beside her wedding band. "Let me marry you again for the right ones, because you're my best friend. Because you saw me at my worst and stayed anyway. Because every day without you was just waiting to finally live." Sienna laughed through tears. "Are you proposing to your wife?" "I'm proposing we start over. No secrets, no arrangements, no clauses. Just us, choosing each other because we can't imagine life any other way." His thumb brushed away her tears. "Sienna Ashford, will you marry me again? Every day? For the rest of our lives?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, to all of it." 6 months later, Sienna stood in the boardroom of Winters Enterprises, renamed Legacy Holdings. She'd taken her father's legitimate businesses and transformed them, establishing ethical practices and community initiatives that honored the man he'd tried to be, not the criminal he'd become. Kieran sat at her right hand, now her business partner as well as her husband. They'd found their rhythm. He handled operations while she focused on strategy and vision. Together, they'd built something clean, something that helped people rather than exploiting them. But the biggest announcement came at their vow renewal ceremony, held in the garden where Sienna's father used to grow roses. Surrounded by friends, Kieran's family, and the employees who'd become their extended family, they exchanged new vows. "You've taught me that love isn't about perfection," Sienna said, her voice steady. "It's about choosing someone even when things are impossibly complicated. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. You saw me, truly saw me, when I was lost, and you waited, even when waiting cost you everything. Kieran's voice was rough with emotion. You could have walked away a dozen times. When you learned about your father. When Vanessa showed up. When I was arrested. But you stayed. You fought for us when I'd almost given up fighting for myself. You're my home, Sienna. The only place I've ever truly belonged. As they kissed, Sienna thought about the scared girl who'd walked into that lawyer's office a year ago, angry about an arranged marriage. She'd had no idea that the worst day of her life would lead to the best one. After the ceremony, Kieran pulled her aside to a quiet corner of the garden. I have one more surprise. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed to a sprawling property upstate with acres of forest and a lake. I bought it 3 years ago, he admitted. When your father made me leave, I used to drive up there and imagine the life we'd have someday. Building a home together. Maybe raising a family. Sienna's breath caught. They'd never discussed children, too focused on surviving their present to plan their future. 2 years later, Sienna sat on the porch of the house they'd built on that property. Inside, she could hear Kieran singing off-key to their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. The sound filled her with a contentment so profound it sometimes scared her, as if happiness this complete couldn't possibly last. But then Kieran appeared at the door, Emma in his arms, both wearing matching grins. Someone wants her mama, he said, settling beside Sienna and placing Emma in her arms. As their daughter grasped Sienna's finger with tiny, determined hands, Kieran wrapped his arm around them both. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Everything we went through to get here? Sienna leaned into him, watching Emma's eyes drift closed in the afternoon sun. I regret the pain we both suffered. I regret the years we lost. But regret us? Never. I claimed you on your 21st birthday, Kieran murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. But the truth is, you claimed me first. That summer when you were 18, before I knew I was allowed to love you. You walked into my life and I was yours. I've been yours ever since. And you swore never to let me go, Sienna finished, remembering his words from their first night together. Best promise I ever made. He tilted her face toward his, kissing her with the tender familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to her heart. Though I think you're the one who never let me go, even when you should have. Especially then, she whispered. Emma stirred between them, making small sounds of contentment. In that moment, with her daughter in her arms, her husband at her side, and the future they'd fought for stretching bright and endless before them, Sienna finally understood what her father had seen all those years ago. He'd known Kieran would wait. He'd known they'd find their way back to each other. And he'd structured everything, the inheritance, the conditions, the timeline, not as manipulation but as a final gift. A chance for them both to grow into the people who could build this kind of love. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Sienna made a silent promise to her father's memory. She'd honor his sacrifice by living fully, loving completely, and teaching their daughter that sometimes the most complicated beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Kieran's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. This was their empire now. Not money or power, but this small, perfect family they'd built from ashes and hope. And she swore, just as he had, never to let it go. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with comes into your life at the worst possible time. And you have to decide, is love worth the risk? Sienna and Kieran proved it is. If this story touched your heart, show some love with that like button. And subscribe, because I've got so many more stories about love that conquers all. Drop a red heart in the comments if you believe in second chances. See you next time. And remember, your love story is out there waiting.